Hey fellows out there, those are some difficult times currently during the current corona epidemic. I hope you, your friends and families are safe and stay home. And actually corona is the topic of today. So even if it's not a nice topic, it can help to show how to create powerful visualizations from existing data sets. And basically that's what we want to do today. So the European Union Open Data Portal offers data on corona cases, corona death per country in different formats. So you can download it as CSV, XLSX, JSON, XML, and so on. And we'll make use of the JSON data, which, as mentioned, it offers on a daily basis. So it shows here on a date base the number of cases and death per country. And we'll make use of this data set to make a visualization and a comparison of the cases and death of different countries. So let me just execute it here for Germany, China, Spain. And then we can see it on a visualization, the number of cases per country, the number of deaths per country. And we'll make it dynamic. So once you change the input parameters here, for example, to compare Italy, France, and Spain, let me run it, then you immediately get the feedback and the display of the related charts here on the front end. We'll implement this in two steps. So first step is the front end in Chart.JS, a powerful JavaScript library. And the second part, the back end, will be implemented using Python Flasks. So basically, Python, the back end, will get those input values out of this formula, use these input values to run through the data and look for the correct data to pass back then to the front end to put it here on a chart. Yeah, that's it. Let's start, and I hope you have some fun with it. All right, so let's start with the front end. Let's create a new file, index.html, and let's spin off a basic HTML construct. Use a title, Corona Charts. Create a headline, H1, Corona Charts. Sorry, H1. Now H2. Let's give it a headline too of select your countries, and then spin up the formula where we can select our countries. So next is the formula, and within the formula, let's create 3 selectable countries. So you can of course use more, but in my opinion, the more countries you select, the more complicated gets the chart and the less insights you can see. So of course, feel free to add more countries. I will stick with 3 here. So first select gets an ID of country and a name of country. And this will be the first selectable country list here. And we need the ID to later on pass it on to the backend. So let's define certain options which we can select. And this basically must use some identifier of the data set to pass it later on to the backend. And I'm choosing here this country territory code for my countries I'm making selectable. And use this value here to later on pass it to the backend. So for Chile, it's CHL. For Germany, it will be, let's see, DEU. And you have to look it up for the countries you want to make selectable in the data. So let's start with Germany in the pick list. And then copy this over several times. So for each country, we want to make selectable. Let's make France selectable. Let's make the same for Italy. and Spain. Let's have a look on the USA. On China. Oh, come on. Korea and Japan. So basically South Korea. Now let's have a look in the browser and open this file with Chrome. And you'll see our first select field is available. Let's copy it over to create two more. And let me give this the ID of country 2, name country 2, country 3, and country 3. And as mentioned, feel free to further list further countries or even create more selectors here to visualize more countries on the same chart. Basically, let's also, because as you can see, this is not nice that for all three pick lists, Germany is selected as default. So let's change it. Let's select France in the first one as default, Italy in the second one, and the USA in the last one. And let's refresh it, and as you can see, those countries are now selected as default. Right, this is a formula, and as mentioned, we needed to later on pass the values out of the formula to the backend. The backend will read the data and pass it back to the front end. Before we do it, let's create the two charts. So one for the cases and one for the depth using Chart.JS library. All right, so let's have a look on how to use Chart.js. Let's enter it on Google, go to chartjs.org and get started. So first thing we need is to install it or use the CDN. So let me go to the CDN here and copy this one over here. We can directly copy it prepared for HTML. So let me copy it and place it in our HTML file. So to install Chart.js. Next step, basically here in the documentation you can see in the HTML we need a canvas, and then in the script part we can create a chart basically, which is then being referred to this canvas with the ID. Let's copy it over. So first of all our canvas, but let's rename the ID. Let's name it case chart to visualize the corona cases here. And let's do one more thing, let's wrap it into a div. You will see later on why. All right, now let's also create another script section here where we can do the Chart.js stuff in JavaScript and close it already. And let's head over to the documentation again. So you can see first thing here is creating a variable referencing the HTML canvas element here with the ID, and then we can actually already create the chart. So first of all, let's do this, copy it over into our scripting session, but let's rename the variables a little bit. So let's name this one case HTML, and it's been referring to this ID here, case chart. Oh, come on, like this. Now we can already create the chart, and let me not copy it over this time perhaps. So let me type it in by scratch. Also, we are not using a bar chart, we will be creating a line chart. So let's have a look on how to do this, but first let's include another headline here, H1 case chart. Or let me simply name it cases. Or even better, corona cases. Let's save it. Let's go back to our file, and you see first of all only the new headline we created here. You are not seeing the chart because we haven't created it. So let's do it now. So we start off with a new variable and let's name it case chart. And we will be creating a new chart.
referring to this variable here, case HTML. Let me already close it here at the end that we don't forget about it. And then let's start the basic setup of the chart. So first of all, we need to define which type of chart we want to use. If we want to use a bar, a donut chart, a radar chart, whatever. So Chart.JS offers a lot of possibilities here, and feel free to look around at Chart.JS and what options it offers. But today we'll be creating a simple line chart. Then we can already define or specify the data we want to use in the chart. And within the data we can define labels and different data sets. So for the labels, to kick off, let's use something like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 at the beginning, which is basically the x-axis of the chart. Later on you'll see this in a minute. And then we can already specify the data sets we want to display in the chart. And as there could be several data sets, you can put it into an array. So each data set can have a label. So as you saw in the beginning, there's a label for each country. Like for France, there's France on top with a certain color and so on. So let's start off with defining a label and just name it label 1 here. Later on we will get the input from the backend here dynamically. Then we can also specify a color for this label. So in this case, let's choose RGB and let's choose a value of 255.99.132. Now we can specify the data itself, so which data, so basically the y-axis of the chart. And let's start with something like 2, 1, 3, 1, 5. And basically that's it already. So let's have a look on this, on how the chart looks in the browser. Let's refresh it. And you'll see here, this is our chart quite big, so let me zoom out a little bit. Oh, it doesn't even help. So this is how the chart looks like. And now let me introduce 2 more things. So we can define also next to the data sets, we can specify options. Yeah, and one option is very important to get rid of this size of the chart and to resize it. So let's have a look on the options. And we'll specifically make use of one option called maintain aspect ratio, and we'll set it to false. So this allows us this option that it's not automatically generating the size within Chart.js, but this allows us to specify this the size in CSS. So let's do it here in our div. And that's why we introduced this div at all. So let's style it a little bit. So I'm using relative positioning here, a height option of 40 and a width option of 80. And of course we could externalize it in a separate CSS file, but I'll keep it easy for now and just include it directly into the div here. Now let's refresh our chart, and it didn't work. Let's see why. Okay, so it seems somehow this option aspect was not taken into consideration, but why? Here the data sets are being, okay, I haven't closed the data section. So actually don't need a comma here. Need to close the data section first of all before we move to the options, and then close it with a comma before we then move on with the options. And let's try it out, refresh it, and still it does not work. I think there's one bracket too much right now. Let's try it like this, refresh. That's what we wanted to achieve. So finally our chart has a good size, fits to the page, and you'll see what we did here. So we specified a label 1, this one. We gave it a color, This is the red stuff you see. We see our labels 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 here on the x-axis, and our data on the y-axis. So this is basically the chart itself. And one thing which we need to get rid of is this filling. So currently the chart gets filled until the line here with some gray color. But later on, if you imagine we have 3 lines here and all are filled, it might get confusing. So let's deactivate this filling option. And we can do this in the data set. Very simple with a command called fill equals false. Let's refresh and you'll see we got rid of it. That's how easily you can create charts. So let's move on to the second one, the death chart. For this, let's simply copy over this one here from the top. Let's call it, Corona death. And let's keep the same styling options here, but give it a different ID. So death chart. And then we can copy over all of this stuff here in our script section, query or create a second variable here, query our ID, yeah, correct. Create a new variable to create the chart, and let's keep it the same. Let's refresh it, and it's not working. Again, some error. Let's see. Okay, we forgot to change this variable. Let's refresh it, and you see our 2 charts here. Now you would ask perhaps, how can you introduce a second data set? Because later on we want to compare different countries, so we need different data sets, and this is actually quite easy. So as this here is an array, you can simply put a comma here and create a new data set directly afterwards. So and copy over those values here into the second data set. Let's give it another label, and important, let's give it another color to differentiate. So for example, 139.139.0. Let's give it other values here, 3, 5, or 6, 4, 2, 1. Let's save it. Let's refresh it. And you can see you have a second data set in your chart. That's how to work with Chart.js. I really like it. It's really powerful and easy to use. So I think next step is heading over to the back end, get this data from the front end, evaluate the data set, and then pass the values back and visualize them in the charts. Alright, the backend, the web server. I'm choosing Python Flask here, but you can choose whatever you want, so npm or any other stuff. I'm choosing Python Flask because it's easy to set up. So let's start. Let's go back to our script. Let's create a Python file, app.py. And let's first of all set up a basic Flask construct. So we need to import certain things. Already began wrong. From Flask import Flask, and we need render template. And I think later on also, what the hell, from Flask, like this. And later on we also need a request. Alright, let's first of all start a Flask app with, or initialize a Flask app like this. And at the end we can run it. App.run, and we run it in debug mode to get some insights. Debug equals true. And that's the basic construct on how to set up a Flask app. And within Flask you need to define certain routes. We'll start with a basic route for the index. So add app route. And we start here for the index. And with a get method equals get. So whenever a web browser sends a get request here to the web server, to the Flask web server, we do something. And in this case, in Flask you need to define a function first of all, which then does something. In this case, to quickly test if our Flask app is running, we're just returning hi. So again, when any web browser, any client requests our index route of the web server, we are returning hi. Let's see if it works. Let's kick off app py. And it's running on localhost. And you see here, my web browser here is requesting this URL with a GET request. We are returning hi. Now, we don't want to return hi, we want to return this web page we just created up front. So we can make use of the render template function to return this index HTML to the web browser. But for this, we need actually to create a new folder. We need to create a templates folder in which this index HTML needs to be copied. So Flask will look into the templates folder to then return the index HTML. Let's test it. Let's refresh it. And you see when the web browser now requests this URL, our web server is responding with the index HTML we just created up front, which is basically our Corona charts. But it's still not in any point dynamic. So if you change something here, nothing will happen. And now I see I forgot something on the front end, the submit button. So let's quickly create our submit button before we forget about it later. So let's move on or back to our index HTML. Let's go back to the form, and yep, we haven't created any. So input type equals submit and the value equals submit, and we can close it. And let's refresh our app, and you see now we have a submit button, which we basically need to submit these values to the backend. Alright, enough of the front, and now let's head back to the backend. And let's define basically what should happen when the method is post. So whenever someone submits this form, something should happen, and this is basically submitting a form as a post method. So let's basically copy this over. But we need to specify an own function, so let's call it result. And at the end, we again want to return this index HTML, but later on pass on further values. But let's first see if we can, first of all, this must be a post method. Let's first of all see if we can access those values we submit from the front end. So let's try it. So remember we created this form, and here we can now, based on the values and the IDs here, get the value which are then being submitted. The ID was country. Let's see, request form country, and then let's print it out. So let's print out country, but it will not work like this. We need to do one more thing again back in the front end. So the form currently does not know where to submit this stuff. So if someone clicks the submit, nothing will happen because the form does not know what to do. So basically we need to define an action. Give it back basically to this route, whatever you do, and define the method. So it is a post method. And once specified, this should work. So whenever someone is sending a post request from the front end on the web server, we can get this request and the data out of it. And in this case, we want to specify, or in specific, get the country value here and print it out. Let's see if it works. So let's refresh. And it doesn't work. Okay, we got some errors here, so perhaps because I typed something in between. Let's restart the web server, let's restart the page, and it's working. And let me click the submit. And you see we are still on the page, but something happens here, and we got a printout of FRA, which is basically the technical ID of France. So if we go back to the web server, let's have a look on France. And here you can see here, this is the value France. which we successfully receiving here in our web server. Now let's complete this first of all. Let's go back to our web server and let's basically get all the countries. So country 1, 2, 3, and I think the IDs were named here, country 2, 3, okay, country 2 and country 3, and let's print out all of them, country 2, country 3, country 1. Let's try it, let's refresh it. Alright, doesn't know why it's taking so long. Let me shut down the web server, restarting it, refreshing this, submit the values, and let's see. Yeah, so we get all of them printed out on our web server. Nice. Now on the web server, based on this data, we need to jump into the dataset and request the number of corona cases, corona death, and so on, and then pass it on back to the front end. So first of all, let's download the dataset. So you can easily find it if you just type in COVID-19 dataset. And here you find the first hit is basically the link to the European Union, but I will also put the link in the video description. And here, here are the different file formats, CSV, XLSX, JSON, XML, and so on. We'll be choosing the JSON format here, save it as, and put it into my download folder. Alright, here it is. Let's copy it over into our project folder and name it like the current date, because basically it's updated each day, which is really nice, like this. Alright, now we have the file in our project folder here and can access it. And you see it's really large, it's a really big data set, nearly 200,000 lines of data, which we can use to visualize things. So what's the next step now? So basically we are receiving the country technical IDs here in our backend, in our web server, like you saw here. And we need to put in those values and loop through the JSON file to get basically the dates, the cases, and the death. And we need to do it 3 times, so for each country we are receiving. So let's put it into a separate function here that we don't need to implement it again and again. So let me call this function get cases first of all to get the cases, and as an input we will receive the country value here. Now to be able to jump through the file we need to import JSON library. And then let's open the file. And basically let's put it into an on variable, because we are writing more functions in a minute, and then we don't always need to put in this name of the file here. And as I mentioned, we could receive a new file each day and we don't need to change it that often. So let's do it like this. File name equals 2504.2020.json. So the name of the file here, and then we can reference it here. So with open file name, so we are opening the file here as JSON file, and then let's do something. And what we do here first of all is transferring data into JSON. So let's use the function JSON load here from the JSON library and put in our JSON file. And then basically we can access this data here from the file in Python. And then basically if you look at the structure of the file, you see there are several records. So one record, next record, next record, and so on. And basically we need to loop now through each and every record here and check if the input from the front end we are getting, so the country technical ID, is matched. So for example, if we receive France, we would check for each record if this country territory code matches, and if so, we will pass on the cases and the death. But if it not matches, we don't care. So let's try to implement it. First of all, let's create an empty list, case list. equals empty list. Now we need to really jump through each line of the JSON file, and we can do this with a for loop. So for record in JSON data records. So I'm accessing the JSON here, and I'm especially accessing the sub entry records here. And now for each record in this records array, let's do something. That's the idea of this for loop. And what we do basically is, if the record if the record country territory code, let me copy it over to not do any typos, equals the one we are getting from our input, so equals country, then we do something, and what we do is we append the value to the case list. So we do an append, and we'll choose the cases value here, which we then want to append. All right. So what's important at this point? So it's a string. Yeah. So those cases here are in a string format, and later on in the front end, let me move over. So here in the front end, we need integer values here. So JavaScript can't work with those as a string. So we need to transform them. So that's in Python, it's quite easy. You can just put an int up front and then close the brackets. And then as soon as all cases for our country are selected, we want to return this list. So let's do it. Let's see if this works. So let's perhaps not print out all the 3 countries we are getting from the request. Let's print out the cases of this country on our web server. So let's print get cases for country 1 and see if this works. Let me quickly refresh the web server, and we made some errors here. Invalid syntax. I think I need to pass on 2 equal signs here. All right, let me restart the web server. It looks good. Let me go to the front end. Let me refresh it. It doesn't work. This was my index file before. This was a web server one. So let me submit the value, and let's see what happened on the back end. And you can see here, we're actually getting the case values. Oh, nice. So let's do it one more time. Click submit. Again, we are getting all the case values here. What's interesting now is, you see, it seems to be sorted in a different way. So I'm pretty sure the cases started slow with 0 cases. Then there were some cases identified and so on. And then the number increased dramatically. But it seems to be sorted wrong. So let's move back to our web server and not return the case list itself, but let's return it inversed or reversed, and there's a nice function for this, which is called the same, reversed. Let's try it. Submit again. Perhaps sometimes it's slow if you do it like this. Let me restart the server. Let me do a refresh, and let me do a submit. And you see now we are getting the values sorted correctly. So starting with the zeros and then somehow increasing dramatically, like you know from the news. Now, next step, let's refactor our code a little bit to make it more visible. So our most important function is this one. So whenever this formula is being posted from the front end, we want to calculate something and then pass it here back to the front end. So let's make it a little bit more clear from the structure. So here we are getting the request data from the front end. Now, once this is done, we want to get the cases for each of the inputs. So get cases for countries. Or let me make this more generic, because we not only need to get the cases, also the death later. So let me keep it. Get cases for countries. And let's assign it to variables here, not print it out directly. So let me call the variable cases country 1 equals get cases country 1. And that's why we build up this function, that we don't need to implement it again and again. So we can do it for all 3. Oh, come on. For all 3 countries we are receiving here from the front end. Now let's implement the same for the death. And this is now quite easy. Let's basically copy this function over here. Let's call it get death. And now we need to change, so we don't need to query for each record the cases, we need to query the death. So let's move it on here, and let's also give the name a different, the list a different name. So not a nice name for a list, I'm sorry, but yeah, it's the data we are querying. So, and then we can also get the death. Let me copy this over, and now we get the cases and we get the death. And what is missing is, let me move on back here, we on the labeled side of the dataset later on, we need the dates. We don't need this numbers 1, 2, 3, 4. If you go back to the dataset, we need to have the dates in here. So let's have a look on how to query them. Alright, before we do it, I found one more error here. So this function here needs to be replaced, of course. And also the variables needs to be renamed. Alright, now let's take care of getting the dates. And basically, let's copy over this function again. Call it get dates. And basically, let's see what we need to, the term is called date wrap here. Let's put it over here. And I think we don't really need to select a country, because the dates are the same for all countries. So we can, we do not need a country as input. We can just say and select one of the inputs here. Let me choose Germany in this case to get the dates. And date labels, let me call it like this, get dates. Alright, and let me try to print out one of the death. And the dates to see if it's working. Before we do so, in the get dates, let's also rename this list to date list. And now let's see if it works and we really collected here the correct data for cases we tested it. Let's test it for the death and also for the dates, that we ensure the data is correct before we pass it back to the front end. So let me quickly restart the web server and refresh the page. And we did some errors. So, okay, we did an error here for the in transformation for the date. This of course will not work, because somehow out of this strange value with those strange characters, Python can't create an int. So for the get dates, this in transformation which we did here is not required. Like this. Again, let's set up and run the web server. Now without errors, hopefully. Let's refresh. Let's click the submit button. And let's see what got printed out. So we got a printout of actual death numbers here, and we got the dates here also sorted correctly, starting off in December and then heading over to the January of this year until today. All right, now I think next step is forwarding those data back to the front end and put it on a chart here. And that's the last step of the video. And then the loop is closed and we have a dynamic representation of corona death and cases here per country. And basically we can do it in the following way, and don't get confused by it. So here where we are returning the index page back after the post request, we can forward additional variables which then can be accessed from within the front end. And to do this, we simply can create variables and assign them with data. So in this case, don't get confused. So this is a variable name which can be accessed in the front end, and this is the data behind here. I'm choosing exactly the same names here. It's perhaps not a best practice, but then I can ensure I don't forget anything. So first of all, let's forward the country data to the front end here. So now we forwarded these 3 country values back to the front end. Now let's do the same with the cases. And this is now some kind of annoying work, but we need to get through it. Now we got the cases. We need the death. And last but not least, we need the dates. And as mentioned, so this is the data, and this is a variable name we can access now in the front end. And let's look on how we do this now. So first, let's prepare the front end. Because we have 3 countries, we need 3 data sets for each chart. So basically, let's do this first. Let's scroll down. So here we already have 2 data sets for the case chart. Let's implement a third one here. And you remember, it's quite easy to do it like this. Let's give it another label and another color. So let me choose 51,153,255, and let's give it a little bit of different data like this and see if it works. Let me refresh, continue. Again, it's taking some time. Let me perhaps again close the web servers. Some errors. Let me start it again, perhaps, and refresh. Now it's working. So first chart is prepared to receive and display 3 data sets. Let's do the same for the second one and basically copy this whole data section over. All right, again, refresh. Et voila, working. Now, last step of today's video is to get back the values and visualize them here in the front end. All right, so back to the front end. Basically, we need to access this data now here in our Chart.JS chart. And basically, we can do this by referring to the variables here which were forwarded. So for example, to get the value for country 1, we can access it directly. Like, let me show it here. For example, in the data set, in the first one, we hard-coded label 1 as a string. We can do this also using double curly brackets, and then we can directly access a variable here. Let's do this for country 1, for country 2, and for country 3. And it's important to choose really those orange highlighted variable names here. So let's refresh the front end. Do you see here it was label 1, 2, 3. Let's do a submit, and it's not working. Let's see why. FRA is not defined. Strange. Okay, I found it. I think we need to put it into a string format again. Let's see if it will work like this. Oh, come on. So we must place strings around it because a label of course must be a string. And I think otherwise JavaScript thinks it's a variable which we are passing, and as this variable is not defined, it doesn't know what to do. So let's try to refresh. And this looks much better. And what you see here now, before we hard-coded label 1, 2, 3, now we have it dynamic. So if we put in France, Italy, USA, we will get those values here. If we change some values to whatever, submit it, we will get those values here. Nice. Now we have the country or the labels. Now let's also try to get the data in here. So first of all, let's copy this one over to the second chart. Country 1, country 2, country 3. And now let's access the other variables here, like cases country 1, country 2, country 3, and death country 1, country 2, country 3, and the date labels. So, and now we make it a little bit more differently. So let's query them first of all. And let's again choose the same variable name here. And again, we can query it with those curly brackets here. And what is important now is we need to additionally introduce a new keyword here, save. This ensures JavaScript keeps the data type basically from what is being handed over from Python. Otherwise, JavaScript would interpret it and assign whatever data type here. So to make it work, we need to use this save keyword here at this place. Now let's do it for all the country, all the cases. And again for the death. Let me see if I have selected the correct variable name here. Yes, and the last one was called date labels. And let's do the same one last time. All right, now we queried the data coming from our web server in the front end. And now we can use it in the charts. So in the data set, we need to replace this data, which we hard-coded here, with our actual values of country 1, country 2, and country 3. And the same below with the death. Replace the data we set manually here with the variables we are getting from the web server. And one thing is missing, I think, yeah, the labels here on top need to be replaced with the date labels. Now let's save it, and hopefully this was the last step. Let's see if it works. Let's refresh it. And voila, it works. So you can see, let me perhaps select France, Italy, and Spain, submit it, and you'll directly get the updated charts here for France, for Italy, for Spain in different colors. And I don't want to interpret these values now or judge certain things because I'm not really an expert on the topic. The target was to show you how to visualize things. And you could really then in detail see the numbers here in the charts, do certain comparison. For example, seeing that the curve for Italy started a little bit earlier as for Spain and France, but especially France or Spain overtook Italy in the number of corona cases. So I think it helps visualizing the situation because in the media you're getting thrown with a lot of numbers and cases increasing, cases decreasing, and sometimes it helps visualizing them to get an own picture. And I think the most important thing is that cases and death are decreasing right now, which is very important. Yeah, and hope the situation will will get more stable now within the next days. Let me recheck it also for the USA, for Germany, and perhaps for China. And especially the US has a lot of cases and deaths. So hopefully it, especially the deaths are decreasing already, which is good. Also the cases. China was a starting point here. So yeah, but as mentioned, I don't want to interpret it really because I'm not an expert in this area. I just wanted to show you how to visualize this. And I hope I got you some important insights into the topic. If you have questions, feel free to drop some comments, and see you in the next video.